Have you ever stopped to think if God really hears your prayers, even those made while lying down without strength, without pretty words? What if I told you that someone died and heard an urgent warning from Jesus about it? Something so shocking that churches don't want you to know. Today you will hear the real story of someone who crossed the threshold of death and came back with a message that can change the way you talk to God forever. So leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss anything. And tell me in the comments what city you are watching this video from. Let's spread this truth that no one else wants to tell. I didn't really believe in visions. I thought it was all an exaggeration, until the day I died. Not figuratively, I really died. My heart stopped for almost 10 minutes, and the moment my body hit the ground, something happened that I will never forget. It was a normal night. I was fixing a circuit breaker in an old building in Texas. A pop, a flash, pain, and then everything went black. It happened so fast I couldn't even think of anything. No, Lord save me. No, Our Father. Nothing. I dropped like a sack of potatoes onto the dirty basement floor. Suddenly, I wasn't there anymore. I was floating in such pitch blackness that it seemed infinite. There was no floor, there was no ceiling, but there was a terrible feeling. I knew I was dead. There was no going back. No sound except my own thought echoing, "God, are you there?" And then I felt a presence, strong, dense, as if something was tearing through the darkness with pure light. That was when I saw him. It wasn't like I imagined. There were no halos, no choirs of angels, no harps. It was him, and I knew it immediately. There was no doubt. It was Jesus, but not the Jesus of the paintings. It was real, infinite, and terrifying in its purity. When he looked at me, I felt my entire being tremble, all my sins exposed, all my basest thoughts. I wanted to run, I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere. And before I could stammer, he spoke. His voice was not sound. It was as if every cell of my being understood. "You thought I wasn't listening to you." That cut me like a knife, because it was true. I had always been ashamed of how I prayed. I prayed lying down. I was tired. I was speechless. Sometimes I would just think, "Help me, God," before falling asleep on the pillow. I thought it was wrong, that God wanted a show. Pretty words, my knees bleeding on the church floor. I tried to justify myself, but I couldn't speak, and he didn't give me time. "You thought I demanded posture. You believed the lie they told you." It was as if everything around me exploded into light, and I saw scenes, not just mine, thousands, millions, people kneeling in immense temples, voices echoing, hands raised, but all that rose from them were empty echoes, because their hearts were far away. And then, in the midst of those visions, Jesus cried out. Yes, he cried out, not in anger, but with a burning urgency. "They lied to you." At that moment I understood. Their own pastors, churches, traditions have taught that prayer is a pose, form, performance, but heaven does not listen to shows. Heaven listens to the truth. He turned to me, with tears in his eyes, and said, "Even you believed that." I broke down. All I could think was, "Sorry." Jesus came closer, and that's when everything changed. I was shaking. I no longer had a body, but I was shaking inside. It was as if my soul was curled up in a corner, trying to hide, but it couldn't. I was naked there, before him. Every empty prayer, every lie I told myself, every time I repeated memorized words just to feel better, everything was exposed, and Jesus kept looking at me. His gaze was a hurricane. It wasn't hate, it was pain. It was a love so pure that it burned me. And then he spoke, with a choked voice. "I have heard all your prayers," I wanted to say, but I didn't even pray properly. I remembered the nights when I would just lie down, exhausted, and just think, "God, help me." Sometimes not even that, just a sigh, a groan of pain in my soul, and I believed that this wasn't prayer, that God didn't care about it, including lying down. Those words crushed me. I saw scenes of myself projected into the air like living holograms. Me in my bed, turned to the side, holding the pillow to hold back the tears. Me on the couch late at night, without the strength to kneel down, just thinking, "I can't take it anymore." Me in the hospital, holding my wife's hand when she almost died, unable to say anything, just thinking, "Please, don't take her." In every scene, Jesus was there, beside me, touching my shoulder, crying with me, and I heard, not with my ears, but with my soul. Those were his strongest prayers. I protested inwardly, but I wasn't on my knees. I didn't do anything right. He raised his hand and everything went silent. And then he shouted, yes. He shouted so loudly that everything around shook. Stop thinking I need a show. The sound pierced my very core. He wasn't yelling at me out of anger. It was desperation. It was urgency. He wanted to wake me up. They taught you to impress me, but I don't want applause. I want you. At that moment, a flash of light tore open the space around us. I saw a well-dressed man kneeling at the altar of a megachurch. His voice was powerful, and there were tears in his eyes. But around him, mirrors were floating. He was praying for himself, for his reputation, to maintain his image as a man of God. Jesus pointed to him and said in a heavy voice, "Look at him. He kneels before the audience, but his heart remains standing before me." I cried, because I saw myself there too. How many times have I knelt down just to feel good, to have a clear conscience, to pretend I was holier than I was? And Jesus turned to me. His eyes were bottomless oceans. The bed was never the problem. The problem is the heart being far away. I couldn't take it anymore. I burst into tears. As I cried, I felt my very being dissolve. It was as if every lie I had told myself burned away in his presence. But it wasn't a fire of destruction. It was a fire of truth, of healing. Jesus did not move away. On the contrary, he came closer, and without saying anything, he made me look elsewhere. The scene changed, as if an invisible veil had been torn. I saw a hospital, a room lit by cold lamps, an old man with a tube in his mouth, his skin almost translucent, his eyes half open. There was no sound. No one was beside him, but inside him, there was a thought so fragile that it seemed to be lost in the air. Lord, don't forget me. I saw this thought come out of him like a very thin thread of light going to heaven, and Jesus held that thread with both hands, as if holding the most precious object in the world. He looked at me. I had no mouth, but my soul asked. He was lying down. Does that count? Jesus shook his head slowly, with tears in his eyes. That was one of the loudest screams I've ever heard. The vision changed again. A small, poorly lit room, a young woman, curled up in bed, hugging the pillow as if she were hugging her last hope. She didn't say anything out loud, but inside her, a whisper echoed, "God, if you are still there, hear me." Jesus fell to his knees beside her bed. Yes, the King of Kings himself, the one who holds up galaxies. Kneeling on the filthy floor of that room, he placed his hand on her shoulder and wept with her. These prayers tear down walls. Those scenes destroyed me. I had always thought that praying was a complicated ritual, that God was a cold judge who wrote down my postures and beautiful words in a notebook. And now I saw him bending over to listen to sighs, thoughts, soundless moans. Jesus turned to me with an expression I will never forget. It was the pain of seeing billions turn away from him because of a lie. They taught that the bed is spiritual failure, but to me, it is an altar. Suddenly I saw churches packed to the brim, thousands of people in ecstasy, hands raised, voices powerful, but there was an invisible ceiling above them. Prayers hit that ceiling and fell back down. I was startled. Why? I wanted to ask. Jesus whispered, with a pain so deep it tore me apart. Because they are not seeking me. They are seeking to see themselves, to feel good, to be applauded. But their hearts are far away. He reached out his hand to me. I was trembling. It's time for you to see more. And before I could answer, everything changed again. When he reached out his hand, I felt as if I were being sucked into a whirlwind of light. It was impossible to resist. Suddenly, everything went silent. There was no ground, no sky, no walls, just a living, pulsating void. And then, visions began to form around us, like windows into other realities. The first image made me want to look away. A pastor on stage at a megachurch, impeccably dressed in a suit, microphone in hand. He was praying out loud, with memorized phrases. The crowd cheered. Shouts of "Amen" and "Hallelujah" filled the hall, but all around him, I saw mirrors, floating mirrors, reflecting only himself. Jesus forced me to look. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. Take a good look. The pastor continued to cry out fervently, but the words came out of him and hit the mirrors. They echoed, distorted, and fell to the floor like dead stones. Jesus spoke with almost unbearable pain. "He is not praying to me. He is praying to himself," I cried. It was unbearable to see that, because I had done the same thing before, maybe not on stage, but in silence, in my room, trying to look like someone I wasn't. Another window opened. A woman knelt in front of the altar, sobbing. Her upraised hands trembled. Her words were beautiful, but inside her, a whirlwind of competition, pride, vanity, a burning desire to be seen as spiritual. Jesus pointed to her. "They applaud, but I don't hear it," I screamed inside. "How can this be? She's kneeling. She's crying," he answered before I could even finish the thought. "Not every tear comes from repentance. Not every bended knee is a sign of surrender." I fell to my knees there, even without a physical body. "So, who does the Lord listen to?" I pleaded. He lifted me up, and with a snap of his fingers, the scenery changed. Now I saw a father, lying on the couch, covered by an old blanket, staring at the ceiling, holding back tears so as not to wake his children in the next room, whispering only in his mind, "God, help me. I don't know what to do anymore." Jesus knelt beside him. He placed his hand on his chest, and he wept. Another image, a girl curled up in her bed in the dark, just mumbling, "I don't know if the Lord still hears me, but if he does, please." Jesus lay beside her. Yes, the King of the universe, lying on the cold floor, his face pressed against the pillow, wet with tears. He turned to me. His eyes were bottomless wells of compassion and fire. "These are my altars," I sobbed. There was nothing left in me but shame and gratitude. And then he whispered, "You haven't seen everything yet." When he said, "You haven't seen it all yet," I felt a chill run through my spirit. It was as if the universe itself held its breath. Then the ground fell away. Light exploded in every direction. I was pulled by an irresistible force, passing through layers and layers of reality. It felt like time itself was bending. I was no longer in one place. I was in everything. And then, the visions returned. I saw a refugee camp, a mother lying on the hard ground, hugging her thin, feverish son. She had no strength to speak, but inside her, a silent lament. "God, don't abandon me." From above, I saw this prayer rise like pure fire. It cut through the darkness like a flaming sword. Jesus appeared beside her, not as king, not as judge, but kneeling in the mud. His clothes were dirty. His hands were on her face. His eyes were filled with tears. She feels she failed because she couldn't kneel. But to me, this ground is sacred. The scene changed again. Now it was a hospital in Chicago. A young man intubated, no voice, glassy eyes, death lurking. But inside him, a fragile thought. "Lord, if you still hear me." That thought seemed like a tiny thread of light, so thin that it almost broke. But Jesus held it with both hands as if it were a treasure. The world sees a vegetable. I see a warrior in prayer. I was choking on tears. It was unbearable to see so much pain, so much loneliness, and to realize that he was in every place. Jesus turned to me. "Do you understand now? They lied to you." Those words sounded like a thunder that cracked my being. They taught that the bed is defeat, that the floor is failure, that silence is absence. But I live in these places. The scenes didn't stop. I saw a drunk man, lying in the alley, unable to say anything, just thinking, "God, I am trash. Kill me or save me." I saw a teenager in the bathroom, cutting her arm, crying silently, just thinking, "If there is someone there, take me." In all these scenes, Jesus was there, sometimes kneeling in the dirt, sometimes holding their faces, sometimes crying, and he looked at me again, with eyes full of fire and compassion. "These are mine," even when they don't know it themselves, even when they think they're failing, because I don't demand a spectacle. I don't want an audience. I want children. I burst into tears. Everything inside me screamed, I'm sorry for believing the lies." Jesus reached out his hand to me. "There's still something else you need to see." And without giving me a choice, he pulled me into another vision. I felt as if I was being ripped from myself. The spiritual wind was cutting through me. Even though I had no body, the brightness grew until everything dissolved into pure light. Then, as my spiritual eyes adjusted, I saw something that chilled me to the core. It was an immense assembly. Multitudes knelt. Voices rose in a deafening chorus. The words were beautiful. Verses, hymns, unison cries, hands outstretched, heads bowed, a spectacle of faith. But there was something wrong. Above them, an invisible ceiling. Their prayers hit this ceiling like rain on glass. They did not pass through. They bounced off and fell lifeless. I wanted to cover my ears. It was horrible. An empty sound, a dead echo. Jesus appeared beside me. His eyes were red from unshed tears. Look, I saw pastors shouting, leaders with voices full of authority, choirs with heavenly harmonies, but among them floated thousands of tiny mirrors. The mirrors did not reflect the sky. They only reflected themselves. They pray to be seen, to feel holy, to maintain their reputation. I shuddered. But Lord, they are kneeling. They are crying out. He stared at me. His voice came out like a muffled thunder, heavy with pain. They bent their knees, but they did not bend their hearts. That sentence destroyed me. Then the atmosphere changed. I saw myself, on a random night, alone in my room. I was on my knees beside the bed, Bible open, beautiful phrases, firm voice, but something shocked me, inside me, a cold emptiness. I wasn't talking to God. I was trying to calm my conscience, trying to look good to myself. Jesus looked at that scene and looked away, sadly. Here, you were on your knees, but your heart was standing, far from me. I screamed inside. I didn't know. I didn't realize. He placed his hand on my chest. I felt as if something old, rotten had been ripped out of me. That's what I want to break today. Then, a new vision. An old woman, lying on a simple bed, motionless. Only her lips moved almost imperceptibly. God, just give me peace. That's all. Jesus was sitting on the edge of the bed. He held her hand like a son. He wept with her. That prayer pierces any sky. I sobbed. Everything inside me was falling apart. I understood. The problem was never the bed. It was never lying down. It was never the silence. The problem was the fake heart. The prayer for the audience. Jesus then turned to me. His words came as a whisper that reverberated like thunder. You still need to see what almost no one sees. And without warning, he pulled me back into the unknown. The light shattered into 1,000 fragments. I felt as if I were being pushed through veils. With each layer I passed through, a weight lifted from my chest. But the last veil was as heavy as lead. When he tore it open, I was in a strange place. It was neither heaven nor hell. It was like the backstage of the spiritual world. There were no walls there, but crowds of souls, all praying. I saw entire churches, synagogues, mosques. I saw people in retreats, mountains, deserts. I saw crowds kneeling. I saw tears. I saw uplifted hands. Devotion seemed to explode like fireworks. But then I realized something that chilled me. The prayers formed lines, beams of energy. Some rose like spears of light, but most fell to the ground. They hit an invisible barrier and were extinguished like embers in water. I turned around, terrified. Sir, why? Jesus appeared beside me, but now his face was grave, heavy, like a king in mourning. Many pray to me, but even more, pray to themselves. He reached out and pointed to a woman kneeling at the altar, weeping loudly. Her voice was broken, the words beautiful, but around her was a crown of shining mirrors. She cries to be seen, to maintain her image as a saint. Her heart is not here. I shuddered. He pulled me to the other side. A man in an expensive suit, microphone in hand, crowd in front of him. He prayed eloquently. The audience said, Amen. But his prayer formed only dark smoke. He preaches to pride. He prays to pride. He doesn't talk to me. I started to cry, because I saw myself in them. I saw my knees on the ground, but my mind was far away. My heart was filled with fear of what others would think if they saw me weak. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. Do you think the problem is the sofa, the bed, the silence? No. He turned me to a brutal scene. A girl in a nightclub bathroom sitting on the filthy floor, hugging her knees, her makeup smeared with tears. Not a sound came out of her mouth, but inside her, a silent scream. God, I don't know if you hear me. Jesus knelt on the sticky bathroom floor. He rested his forehead against hers. He cried with her. That prayer shook the sky. I saw a father lying on the sofa, covering his face with his arm to cry without making noise, so as not to wake his children. Jesus was there too, kneeling. These are mine, even when they cannot speak, even when they only think, because I do not listen to the volume. I listen to the truth. He looked back at me. Now, I will show you the biggest mistake that was taught. The light changed again, and pulled me with it. I was pulled by a force so overwhelming that it felt like the very fabric of the universe was tearing itself apart. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I was in an indescribable place, a vast hall, with no walls, no ceiling, just a living light that pulsed like a heart. There I saw endless rows of people kneeling. They looked like statues of faith, hands raised, heads bowed, voices echoing in powerful chants. It was the sound of 1,000 choirs, the sound of perfect devotion, but something was wrong. Jesus stood beside me. His face was lit up from within, but there was an incalculable sadness. He said nothing. He just made me look. As people prayed, a flame came out of their chests. Some were bright and glowing. Others were just smoke. Look carefully. I saw an elegant man, suit neat, tie impeccable, on his knees, tears in his eyes. But the flame that came out of him was gray, suffocated. Around him, millions of mirrors, floating mirrors that surrounded him, all turned towards himself. He is not praying to me. He is praying to himself, to maintain his image, to applaud himself. I was shaking. I saw a woman in the corner, on her knees, shaking, shouting verses, but around her were chains of pride, chains of competition, thoughts of judgment against others. Jesus took a deep breath, his voice choked. They have learned to appear holy, but their hearts are locked away, far away. Suddenly, he raised his hand, and the whole vision came crashing down like glass breaking. Now we were in a tiny room in a Detroit tenement. A man was lying on an old couch. His shirt was torn. Sweat was pouring down his face. He was staring at the ceiling, unable to speak. But inside him was a whisper. God, I'm at the end. Help me. Jesus knelt on the dirty ground beside him. He held his hand, and he wept. This is the purest altar, because there is no audience. There is no vanity, only pain, only truth. I sobbed. My entire being was shattered. They lied to you. Jesus spoke with pain, but with authority. They said that I want performance, that I demand spectacle, that the bed is defeat, that the sofa is failure, that silence is distance. He squeezed my hand tightly. But I am in these places. I am in the silence, in the sigh, in the broken thought, in the contained tear. I do not look for actors. I look for children. The scene changed again. I saw an old woman in a nursing home. She lay motionless in bed, her eyes streaming with tears. She couldn't move her lips, but a thought flashed through her mind. Lord, just give me peace. Jesus was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, crying with her. He turned to me. His eyes seemed to carry the weight of the world. Now do you understand why I brought you here? His words seemed to pierce my soul like blades, but at the same time they stitched up my oldest wounds. Now do you understand why I brought you here? I wanted to answer, but I couldn't, because in that moment, I realized everything. All the nights I spent thinking my prayer is worthless. All the times I felt like a hypocrite for not being able to kneel. All the times I thought that God only listened to those who knew how to speak beautifully. And he continued, without haste, but with an almost desperate urgency. They taught me that I want a show, that I need an audience, that I am impressed by a loud voice, but I am pleased with the truth. I started seeing flashes, like windows cascading open, a single mother lying on the bedroom floor trying not to cry too loudly so as not to wake her baby. God, I can't take it anymore. A man in the back seat of a car, lying down, covered by a coat, trying to survive the cold outside. Lord, hear me. That's all. A teenage girl lies on the floor of the school bathroom, hidden, silent tears dripping onto the tile. God, if he exists, show me. In all these scenes, Jesus appeared, not hovering high above like an untouchable king, but kneeling, lying down, hugging, weeping. He mingled in their pain. These are my sanctuaries. I couldn't stop crying. Sir, why? Why show this to me? He came closer until he was so close that his presence crushed me and gave me life at the same time. Because you believed the lie. You thought I was far away when you were lying down praying. You thought you were offending me with your weakness. But I was closer than ever. That sentence went through me like fire. I remembered every time I had just thought, "Help me, God," before passing out from exhaustion. Every time I couldn't even speak. And then he showed me something that completely destroyed me. I saw myself, lying on the cold floor of the building where I died. No heartbeat, no breathing, but inside me there was a single thought. Not a pretty phrase, not a verse. God, please. And in that instant, I saw the sky tear apart. I saw lights crossing dimensions. I saw a flash of light fall upon me like a ray of mercy. Jesus pointed to that scene. His voice trembled. That was one of the most powerful prayers I have ever heard. I sobbed. My whole soul seemed to burst into tears. He held my face in his hands. He looked inside me. Now you need to understand why I listened to you like this. The whole place shook. The light grew. It was as if the universe itself held its breath. Get ready. I'm going to show you what almost no one believes. The light exploded in a way that made it feel like my spirit was going to shatter. I screamed without a voice. It was as if every particle of me was sucked into that raw, incandescent truth. Then everything went quiet. Jesus held me, firmly, not just as a friend, but as someone holding up a building that was about to collapse. His eyes were filled with tears, but there was a fire in them, a fire of love that burned away all lies. Listen, it wasn't a request, it was a decree. Suddenly, everything around me turned into a mirror, but they weren't ordinary mirrors. They were windows to millions of moments. I saw people kneeling in luxurious temples, strong voices, beautiful words, but inside them, pride, vanity, comparison. I saw pastors at the altar, preaching with power, but thinking, what will they think of me? How will they applaud me? I saw multitudes of believers with hands raised but hearts cold, judging one another, competing to see who looked the most holy. Jesus whispered, but his voice shook the whole place. These prayers are performances. I do not receive them, because I do not want actors. I have seen people burst into tears, but out of fear of hell, not out of love. I have seen others pray to feel superior. Then, the scene changed. Now I saw old beds, worn sofas, cold floors, people left alone, exhausted, crying without sound, thinking only, God, please, Lord, help me. I don't know what to say. Jesus appeared in each of these scenes, sometimes kneeling on the filthy ground, sometimes lying beside them, sometimes holding their hands in desperate strength. These are my favorite prayers. He turned to me. Do you understand now why I brought you here? Why I allowed you to die? I couldn't speak, but he didn't need my answer. You believed a lie, that to talk to me, you needed strength, possession, beauty. But I hear even the most broken thought, the weakest sigh, the tear that no one sees. He brought me closer. I felt like I was sinking into him. The problem was never praying lying down. The problem is living standing up, proud. Far from me, that sentence exploded inside me. Heaven does not measure posture. It measures truth. I saw the bed become an altar, the pillow become a pulpit, silence become a song. I don't need voices. I need hearts. Then, with a love so strong that it almost killed me again, he rested his forehead against mine and said, Go, tell them that I hear them, even when they can only whisper, even when they can only think, even when they are lying down. The place shook, the light swallowed me, and I knew I had to tell, I had to scream. The biggest mistake we have been taught is that God only listens to those who know how to pray beautifully. The truth, he listens even to silence, even to thoughts, even to sighs, even lying down. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.